Recording here. Alrighty, our speaker today, we are very thrilled to have. His name is Jonathan Harrop. Jonathan is a family therapist in the state of Arizona. He is an LMFT approved supervisor. He's been practicing marriage and family therapy for the last 10 years. He has worked as a family therapist in the public domain, as a therapist in the prison system, and has been working in private practice for the last 4 years. Jonathan has devoted his training and expertise to working with attachment trauma and complex trauma, and working with the complex dynamics that come to couples counseling work when these traumas are present. In addition to this, Jonathan also serves as a chaplain in the Arizona Army National Guard. He has been married to his wife, Mackenzie, for 14 years, and they have 5 beautiful, busy, and rambunctious kids, 3 girls and 2 boys. So without further ado, I present Jonathan Harrop. Take it away.
Thank you, Jordan. So it's strange doing this in a setting like this. I'm used to seeing faces and more feedback and things like that. So pictures will do, names will do. And, I designed this to be interactive as much as possible. We're going to try to get that. So as I ask questions or ask for comments, feel free to just throw there in the chat screen or the chat box what your comments or your questions are in regards to it. And other than that, yep. So I'll introduce myself just a little bit. Jonathan Harrop. I'm the owner of East Valley Family Therapy. I've got some awesome therapists that work here with me. And we're a practice that really specializes in working with attachment and working with whether it's children with parents, if it's children themselves who are experiencing some attachment injuries, even working with adults who probably carry some attachment traumas. And that shows up both individually, but largely in couple settings is where we're working with people around. And so this attachment theory, I would say, is I am an attachment therapist. It's my bread and butter. It's how I see really the world. It's how I see why we do what we do. Granted, I understand there's things that play into mental health, mental illness that's outside of the attachment frame. And so I do want to recognize that. But understand in this setting, we're going to be talking about all the pieces that relate to at least our attachment systems and what it's set up to do. And other than that, let's just get started. I was excited when I was asked to do this, a little intimidated when I was asked to do this, but y'all bear with me and we'll make this good. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Jordan. Okay. So goals of training. As I go over the goals of training that I have, what I want you to do is think about, is there anything that you're hoping to get out of the training today? Any insight that you're hoping to gain? Principles you want to understand better, anything like that. So as I go over my own goals, if you have any of those questions, because I'm going to ask that at the end of this goals of the training, feel free to just post them there in the box, and I'll be interested to see if we're going to be able to meet some of those expectations that some of you have come here with, and see if we can make it a win-win all around for that. So first goal. Sorry, I have to move the pictures over here of everyone else, is to understand the attachment function of the learned behaviors in clients with personality disorders. So there's attachment reasons for why people act the way that they do, especially when it comes with personality disorders. What I want us to come away with an understanding with today is understanding what is the attachment function. What is the function behind the behavior that's coming out of these people, and how can we begin tuning into that piece with them? I also want to make sure that we understand the attachment dilemmas that those with personality disorders are faced with. They can really make it complicated. It can make it complicated for us to work with them. It really just makes it complicated for them in life. It's really tough when you have a personality disorder to connect really deeply or authentically with people and not have it just go south. And so while we have this longing for connection, we also have these strategies inside that we've learned that make that difficult. And so we're going to go on to understanding some of that. We're going to talk about some skills. I'm going to offer some suggestions on ways to help just depathologize those with personality disorders. You know, there really is a stigma, I think, in our field around people with personality disorders, how difficult they are to work with, how they can even kind of turn on the therapist. Sometimes they're scary for us. They're intimidating for us. I remember when I was in my master's program, at least 3 of my professors said, don't work with someone with borderline personality disorder. And I guess I just kind of took that as a challenge of like, okay, now I want to understand this. And I'm grateful I have. So we want to depathologize those with personality disorders and help them to better navigate their attachment dilemmas and begin healing their attachment traumas that often cause these stuck patterns of interaction to take place. Those are overall the goals that I have. I wonder if there's any things that people are putting out there in the group that you're hoping to also get away from this presentation.
We have not had anything specific come in yet.
Okay, that's fine.
We did have one person that said they more about if any personality disorders resemble DID.
Okay. Okay.
And then looks like one more, a better understanding so I can explain it more effectively to my patients when they ask.
Perfect. Yeah, and you should be getting that out of the presentation today. And I'll see if I can come back. If I don't come back on my own to this piece about DID, please help remind me, but I wrote it down here so I wouldn't forget. Okay. All right, any others? Shall I move forward?
We got one more comment from someone just wanting to learn how to support someone whose partner is dealing with borderline personality disorder.
Ooh, good.
And then a thank you for destigmatizing the topic.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, I really think that the information that you get from today will be really helpful information if you're working with someone who has a spouse or a family member who has a personality disorder. This information will be really good to help them depathologize themselves, the patterns that they're seeing in that loved one, and begin learning how to work with that person a little more effectively. Okay, moving forward. So attachment theory, you know, I don't want to go too far into the basics. I'm assuming at this point that that everyone has had at least some training in attachment theory and understands it at least at kind of a basic level. As many probably know, John Bowlby was really kind of the father of how we understand attachment theory today. Mary Ainsworth played a huge role as she did the strange situation experiment, taking kids, putting them in a room with their parent, having the parent leave for a time, and then coming back and, you know, seeing how they responded to being in that strange situation without their attached caregiver. And from that, we're going to talk about some of the attachment, it'll come to me, styles. That's the word. The attachment styles that we began studying and making sense of because of her research. Then you have Harry Harlow, who did the baby monkey experiment. You know, he really did this fascinating thing where he would take these baby monkeys, separate them from their mothers, and give them these surrogate mothers, both made out of wire, but one that had a source of food, which would typically be a bottle of baby milk, and the other being clothed with just a nice soft fur. And then they just studied. They studied which one is the baby going to go to, and what they found was the baby would go to the one with the food, but it would spend so much more of the time with the fake mama monkey that had the cloth and the clothing. Real quick, I hear some music out there. It's wonderful. I love the song.
I think we got it. All right, we were feeling festive there.
I was getting into the spirit. But they also found that when the baby monkeys would experience a scary situation or a distressful situation, they would immediately go to the mama monkey that had the fur that was more comforting. And really what that showed was the strength of an emotional need that was there, even over physical. And then also I want to give some credit to Sue Johnson, who's done so much research regarding adult attached relationships. You know, we've studied so much in terms of attachment and in childhood. And I know there's been others other than Sue Johnson, but she's really kind of leaded a lot of the work around adult attachment and how we understand how these patterns that we experience in childhood carry over into our adult romantic relationships. So attachment styles, I want to touch on this piece just a little bit because this is going to play into why we see some of the patterns that we see in people with personality disorders. In Mary Ainsworth's work, they studied the different types of attachments that children would show with their caregivers. And it really was pretty reflective on the nature of the parenting, probably also temperament of the child. You know, not always was it just the parents' parenting, but there were other factors that would play into it. But what they kind of narrowed it down to was these four patterns of attachment. One that's ambivalent. I'm going to just read off a couple of these. So the ambivalent, these children become very distressed when a parent leaves. Ambivalent attachment styles are considered uncommon, really affecting roughly 7 to 15% of US children. It's not as common to see this one in children. Typically comes about as a result of poor parental availability. And these children cannot depend on their primary caregivers to be there when they need them. So really these children just learn that, you know, we're not gonna really have an available parent. And so we're going to be ambivalent in our attachment. We can vacillate between, you know, being really overly clingy and needy, which oftentimes these children would show at school, as they would get very clingy with their teachers. But then on the flip side of it, you know, sometimes would kind of back away. And so they would tend to send some mixed messages, similar to the disorganized attachment. Avoidant attachment, children with an avoidant attachment tend to avoid parents or caregivers, showing no preference between a caregiver and a complete stranger. Really, these children are learning to just kind of manage disconnection, and they learn to manage it or to cope with it by disconnecting. This attachment style often tends to be a result of abusive or neglectful caregivers. And you'll notice with each of these insecure attachment styles, there's always going to be kind of this role of you know, the responsiveness of the parents with these children. Children who are punished for relying on a caregiver will learn to avoid seeking help in the future. They just really learn, okay, I can't get my needs met through others, so I'm just going to learn to manage and take care on my own. And so they tend to avoid more. Disorganized attachment. These children display a confusing mix of behavior, seeming disoriented, dazed, confused. They can avoid or resist the parent. And then again, sometimes they can even punish the parent when the parent comes back in. They have a lack clear of attachment pattern. Typically, this comes from caregivers that almost send mixed messages to the child. You know, in one hand, the parent can be really responsive. In another moment, they can be very reactive. And what that does is it kind of confuses the child. I don't know if I'm going to get happy, healthy mom or dad, or if I'm going to get, you know, really triggered or upset mom or dad that I need to fearfully, you know, stay away from. And so it really creates this confusion of, I don't know how to regulate what I have going on inside. Secure attachment, of course, we all think this would be the ideal, where we can depend on our caregivers, show distress when separated, and joy when reunited. I think a lot of us seek for this in our own children. If you work in a school setting, we seek for that in our school children. But we want this secure attachment where we can just feel safe, connected, good. Okay, so one thing I want to, if I can frame attachment theory in really one of two lights. When we have a healthy or an unhealthy attachment, it really shapes the way we see two things. It shapes the way we view ourselves, which in this presentation I'm going to refer to as view of self, and it also shapes the way we view others, so a view of others. When we've got these close, connected, attached relationships, when you see that baby or that infant being really taken care of by their mom or being taken care of by their dad, how they are internalizing their experiences. I am safe. The world around me is safe. I can trust others. So a view of other really builds in this sense of security. And it also builds in them a pretty high sense of self. They feel good. They feel confident. They feel like they can go out, they can conquer the world, they can explore, they can, do what they need to because I'm being supported in it. And if, something goes wrong or goes crazy, I can come back and get my needs met. On the flip side, when there's attachment distress that's experienced, especially if it's long-term attachment distress that just lingers for a time, it can affect those worldviews. And typically we'll internalize it in one of two ways, if not a little bit of both. And really what it's going to do is it's going to infuse some fears in us. So if these attachment injuries cause this view of self to be affected, what's going to happen is I'm going to feel like I'm not good enough. Something's wrong with me. Something's broken inside. If I could use just a quick example. So I came from a family where we were pretty correcting, not very emotional, but if we showed much emotion, we were angry or upset, and there was loving there too. But not always was there a range of emotions that we knew how to experience or to deal with. So I become this young father, and pretty quickly, my wife and I, we have one child, and then two, and then three, girl, boy, girl. And there was one day where this boy, love this boy, James. He is a boy that's just full, energetic, and he's a big kid. He didn't get my genes. He got some bigger genes than I did. But in all of his kind of rambunctiousness and his size, what he would do totally unintentionally is constantly beat up on his sisters. He was just trying to play with them. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't understand this, how to control, my energy and what's going on inside. And so, my wife and I, we would constantly get frustrated with this. And so we would correct him. James, stop. James, let go of your sister. James, let go of her hair. James, get off of her. And we would just continue correcting this kid over and over and over again. And I didn't realize what kind of a message we were sending to him. So subtle and completely unintentional. But the message we were sending to him was saying, James, you're bad. James, something's wrong with you. You need to be fixed. And what kind of opened my eyes to that was one day I was jumping on the trampoline with James and his little sister, Sarah, and he inevitably knocked her over by accident. And while he did that, before I could even turn around on the trampoline to point at him and say, James, contain yourself a little bit, he was off of the trampoline, running to the house, crying, saying, I'm a bad boy. Every time I think about that instance, I still feel a sense of sadness when I see that, because that's the last thing I want for my son. The last thing I want is for him to think that there's anything bad about him. He's a good boy. He just has a lot of wiggles and he doesn't know how to contain them. And so it became this moment that Mackenzie and I needed to spend together to kind of counsel with one another on how are we going to do this different with James. And we realized we still needed to correct the behavior, but we needed to do it in a way that wasn't going to send the message of you're a bad kid. And so from then on, what we would do is basically, all right, James, buddy, you're getting a little out of hand. That's okay. You got a lot of wiggles inside. Let's take care of that. But go make it better with your sister, okay? And then little by little, he started getting to a place where he would be able to go back to one of his sisters. He'd give him a really cute hug. He'd say, I'm sorry. And he'd make it better. And then it just got good. But being able to treat it as not a big deal you know, it really shows how much these attachment systems, as much as we can experience injury in them, we can experience healing in them too. But really, to this day, he still can get overwhelmed with a sense of shame and feeling like he's a bad boy. And so that's a piece we continue to try to build up in him. Then you've got this, you know, insecurity that can come not necessarily about myself, that I'm bad, but in the world around us, that others don't accept me, others don't like me, I can't trust others. And so when these attached relationships that we have, or if we experience these attachment injuries, or if we go through just a period of that lacking healthy attachment or that ability to repair, we can get to a place where we're constantly kind of questioning others, we're questioning their intent, or we at least just don't feel safe and secure around others. Okay, examples of attachment system in distress. I'm going to show you a video right now. This is called the still face experiment. You can find this on YouTube if you want to look it up. Just type in still face experiment. But it's really quite an amazing experiment that's been done to help study the process of attachment, what a healthy attachment looks like, and the process of what takes place when there's simply just lack of attunement. Not even abuse or not shaming, but just a lack of attentiveness or attunement.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In this still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
Okay. You know, I love that video and I hate it at the same time. It's always painful to watch that baby go through that for just a couple minutes and to see how much she falls apart and just can't contain the disappointment that she's going through. But the reason that I love showing that video is it shows just how sensitive we are. We are mammals, and mammals have built within them this piece that yearns for connection, that yearns to be with its kind, and not just for survival, but for emotional connection. And that piece is so strong that sometimes it can even override desires for food, for water, other things that we need for survival. So it really is this powerful attachment system that we have built inside of us that causes us to yearn for or be connected to one another. One thing I appreciate that he shared in that video, it talks about this good, the bad, the ugly. And that's, I think, what we start seeing with personality disorders is when we get into the ugly. So real quick, let's look at what the good looks like. So in the good, typically, there's going to be a healthy attachment system. There's closeness, there's connection, there's an interdependence that happens there. There's kind of this term in our world, I feel like right now, that's being used, which is codependence. And I think what in part that's done is that it's pathologized connectedness or dependence or an interdependence that's there in relationships. For a relationship to be healthy, there is a dependence that we have from one another. But there's also an independence that's there when it's a healthy connectedness. And so I do want to separate the difference between a codependence and a healthy interdependence. But in a good relationship, there is this interdependence. We can really lean on and rely on each other for emotional comfort, for support, to strengthen us when things are hard. And there's also this increased security in our own independence. I know between my wife and I, the more connected I feel to Mackenzie, the more secure I feel personally. I feel like I can go out, I can do more, I can accomplish more, I have more energy. It just fuels me personally. But if things are tense between us, if we're struggling some, it affects me personally. I tend to question myself more. I tend to get more insecure. And same goes the other way around. If we're doing good, if I'm doing good individually, I'm going to tend to be a little kinder and nicer to my wife. And if I'm struggling personally, if I've got some insecurities going on inside, then I can tend to be a little bit more of a butthead. Excuse my language. So this healthy attachment system, really we're trying to foster both a healthy connectedness and a safety and independence too. The pieces we're usually looking for in a healthy relationship, in the EFT world, emotionally focused therapy, is all about attachment, and it's all about working with people in these adult romantic relationships and their attachment systems inside. And what we're looking for in romantic partners, what we're looking for in friends, what we're looking for in family, we're looking for ARE. Are you there? Are you accessible? Are you responsive? Are you engaged? If I can check off the boxes of those things with my loved ones, then there's going to be a pretty good sense of security that's there. If my wife is accessible, or if I'm accessible to her, it feels really good inside. Because not always do I need, but when I do, and you can be there, that's awesome. Responsive. Okay, so when I come to you, you're able to respond to me and where I'm at. That feels really good. And then engaged. Are you actually here with me? Or are you just kind of giving me the leftovers? One of the things Mackenzie hated the most when I was going through my master's program was when she would be there wanting to connect, wanting to talk, and I'd be right here on my computer and I'd be working. And I would even repeat back all the things she was saying, but was I engaged? Not really. So it really requires being both responsive and engaged. And of course, being accessible as we go there. One of the pieces I want to talk about with this is this idea of co-regulation. You look at how we learn to kind of regulate our emotions inside. We have this amazing capacity to regulate our own emotions, but how do we learn that? A lot of us learn that through co-regulating. when we're that little kid and, you know, I fall down, I skin my knee, and someone comes over to me and says, "Oh, you hurt your knee. That's hurt. That hurts. You're sad." They're reflecting back to me my experience. In a sense, they're holding a mirror up to me, and that calms my nervous system. That helps. That chills me out, and I feel seen. And so there's something in this co-regulating. When I can regulate my emotional experience with another, and they can meet me in that place. It's one strategy that we have for regulating emotion, is this idea of co-regulating. But it's the healthier the co-regulation is, it increases our capacity typically to auto-regulate. The more we have that attentiveness, that attunement, that accessible, responsive, engaged experience with loved ones, then we learn more and more how to auto-regulate, or how to better auto-regulate. When people are coming into our offices individually and they're struggling with these emotions, they are seeking to co-regulate with someone because they're struggling to auto-regulate. They don't know how to do it. It's outside of their skill set. It's just not there for them. And so they're leaning on us to co-regulate with them, to give them an experience where they can be seen. In a sense, we're acting as that attachment figure for them that allows them to be seen and heard and be reflected back, so that they can make more sense of their experience and become more kind of connected within themselves. I love this model here. Cooper, Hoffman, Marvin, and Powell, the Circle of Security International. They've got the website down there. They do a lot of work with parents and attachment. But some of the pieces that they really emphasize in there is this idea that a secure attached relationship serves as both a secure base and a safe haven. A secure base for me to go out and explore and experience independence, which fosters a healthy independence, which fosters this piece that wants to build up for myself, but that also becomes this safe haven where I can come back and I can feel connected, where I can come back. And if anything goes wrong in my exploration out here, I can come back and be comforted and, you know, get help making sense of and be able to learn and grow and do better more. And so that's a lot of what we're seeking for in this good, healthy attachment, is both offering a secure base to launch out from and a safe haven to return back to. The bad. So he talks about the good, the bad, the ugly. The bad is normal life. We all experience the bad. It's when we experience either disapproval or unresponsiveness or disconnection. But even though all of us experience this, in healthy attached relationships, there is still repair and recovery. I wish I could have found the research study that I found this in. So if you remind me, I'll go dig a little deeper and I'll find it for you guys. Not today, but you know, if anything, can send it out to Aurora. But there was one research study that I saw that talked about, okay, what percentage of responsiveness do parents need to have for a child to feel ultimately secure in their relationship? I want you to ask yourself that question. What do you think it would be? 50, 60, 70, 30? The answer they came up with, 15%. You know, we can get by with amazingly little amounts of responsiveness. But the important thing is that there is some responsiveness. As long as there's some, we're all experiencing life. We all are kind of carrying our baggage or our rocks in our bags on our back. And because of that, it makes it hard sometimes to show up and be there for another person, even if it's our own children, even if it's our spouse. And what really shows the difference between healthy connected relationships where there's a sense of security and those where there's not, where we get stuck into this pattern, is this idea of repair. We can come back in those moments of disconnection, and we can come back and repair and be connected again. The strategies that we typically tend to develop when we experience the bad is pursuing behaviors and withdrawing behaviors. So if you go back to to these attachment styles in children, the ambivalent, the avoidant, the disorganized, you can see that a lot of I don't know what just happened there. Are you guys still seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes, but not in presentation mode currently.
Yeah, somehow my computer went to the email. Let me come back here.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So the different strategies in each of those styles, attachment styles, they can either be pursuing like behaviors or withdrawing like behaviors. When I speak of pursuing behaviors, those are typically action tendencies that lead us towards coming to. When there's distress, that coming to can oftentimes be in bigger ways that on the receiving side is uncomfortable. We don't like it. So if, I could talk about children, I'm going to talk about adults. If let's say my spouse comes to me and I've, not been present, not been available, she can come out and attack. She can criticize me for not being there. She can, she can basically just speak her mind. But when she's doing it in those ways, typically there's a lot of emotion connected to it. And on the receiver end, depending on how comfortable you are with emotion and what your attachment history is around emotion, either you can take that or that's going to be hard for you and you can't take that. The withdrawing behaviors tends to be more of a, that when that's not there, or let's say when someone is kind of coming to you and they're doing those things, and if the emotion is uncomfortable for you, if emotion is hard for you, and if you don't know how to regulate or it's never been safe to regulate it, you're going to go more internal. You're going to withdraw. You're going to go inward, and you're going to kind of just find ways to manage on your own. When we're working with addictions, typically we see a lot of withdrawing behaviors in that they withdraw from people and they pursue substances because that's their way of learning how to manage and cope with tough emotions that they don't know and haven't learned how to manage and deal with. So there's that. Then we've got the ugly. This is when our reactions to disconnection or unresponsiveness, disapproval, become stuck ways of being. Those pursuing withdrawing strategies become rigid and reactive. Now, granted, everyone experiences these pursuing withdrawing behaviors. I engage in them. Mackenzie engages in them. I'm sure each one of you have experienced engaging in those behaviors when that attachment distress is there. So just because it's there doesn't mean you have a personality disorder. I'm not meaning that. But it's when these strategies that we use become so rigid and when the reactivity is so high to any of these triggers that it then creates these personality disorders. Factors that can often play into it turning into this ugly realm is when there's been abuse, when there's been big neglect, especially emotional neglect, and when there's been shaming. I think back to that video that we just watched, and how much do we see that from parents that don't necessarily mean to. They've done that similar experiment, except by observing children when their parents are on their cell phones. And what is that child receiving? An unresponsive parent, just like the still face experiment. And what does that child reflect? All those same behaviors. They start, a little bit of like, hey, are you there? Hello? Hey. And then they start escalating that tone and they start escalating it. And typically what will happen is, because the parent is still somewhat there, the parent will then either attune to them, they'll pick up on this call or this bid for connection and they'll tune to them, or the parent is really focused on something, they're getting irritated by the child and this increased tone that's coming from them, and they'll correct them. And that's where the shaming piece can come, where my bid for connection not only is not met, but it's shamed. And so then what I begin to learn, and especially if that becomes a habit over time or an experience over time, where when I reach out and bid for that connection, which is very normal and very natural for all of us, but I'm met with, again, not just unresponsiveness, but I'm met with a shaming response, where now how my body internalizes that, how my brain internalizes that is, it's not okay that I need, but yet I still need. And so it creates this crazy dilemma inside that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. And that dilemma keeps us in this stuck place of needing because we're mammals and feeling like we can't go there. But it's similar with the abuse, and it's similar with the neglect. that, you know, inside each one of us is this need to connect, but abuse, neglect, or even abuse through this shaming, when they're long-term solutions that are being used to manage that emotion, can become these stuck points for us. There's this idea out there about attachment trauma. Another word used for it is complex trauma. You know, the reason we call it complex trauma is because it really is pretty complex. It's not very explicit. Most of the time when I have clients coming into my office that have symptoms of this complex trauma, they're not coming in saying, I have trauma. They're coming in saying, I'm depressed. There's a bunch of stuff going on inside of me I don't understand. I'm suicidal. They're not understanding their world or their experience. They have a very low view of themselves, and they can't trust that others are there for them or even care for them. And so it's a very lonely place for them to be. But they would never consider themselves, most of the time, they wouldn't consider themselves traumatized because, well, I wasn't beaten. I wasn't, you know, others have gone through so much worse, so mine can't really be that bad. But yeah, when you're a child and you're simply having an unresponsiveness that's there, let's say I grow up and my parents are depressed, or they've got their own marital problems that they're dealing with and the stress of all of that, and now they're just not available for me because of all the stress that they're experiencing. That's a lonely place for me to be as a child. And as a child, that can be really traumatizing because my whole world is wrapped up around them. And so when they aren't meeting me with that responsiveness that I need, which is normal, then I can begin to internalize that again in either a way that's going to affect my view of self, or that it's going to affect the way I perceive my belongingness in society. And it's complex because you never know if you're out of Iraq. To use an army analogy, you know, when soldiers come back, it's horrible, the stuff that they've seen, and there's complexities that's hard for them to understand, but there is a very pinpointed, I can put my finger on what happened. When you're working with someone who carries more this childhood complex trauma, or this attachment trauma, it's hard for them to put their finger on it. And because it's revolving attached relationships, which are all around us, they go to this place where they say, basically their internal experience is they've never left Iraq. They're still in the war. And I don't know from one moment to the next if I'm going to be met with abuse or neglect or abandonment or rejection or shame or what. And so really their whole world and life experience now begins to be wrapped up around this attachment trauma that now becomes a trigger just about everywhere they turn. Other factors that can play into it turning into the ugly, you know, you can see children come from the same family and some may fare okay, generally okay. And then others will become a lot more of hot messes inside. And a lot has to do with temperament. You know, there's this term out there about highly sensitive people, HSPs. And it's basically this idea that there are some who just come into this world with a temperament that is so much more able to feel emotion. They feel things bigger. Some people feel things not as big. Some people feel things very big. And what we find is that typically people that carry more of this attachment trauma and that will then develop these personality disorders typically are very sensitive people. They're very sensitive people. And that is a beautiful gift that they have. But because of just, you know, their inability to make sense of their experiences that have put them in so much of a survival mode relationally, they're not able to really utilize those gifts all the time. But even then, they can utilize those gifts in amazing ways. I'm always amazed at how they're able to show up for others, even when they're struggling inside of themselves with so much of not feeling belonging and not feeling of worth. Okay, thus enters personality disorders. I want to talk about personality disorders as stuck ways of managing our attachment distress. These are the various strategies. Oh, yeah, Cassie, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to pop in here. We've had some comments coming through.
Okay.
But
can we take a moment?
Yeah, just really quickly. And we also have about 35 minutes left just to give you kind of a timeline. But we had someone actually joining us from the UK. Just kind of had a question about the stigma or any hesitance professionally to use the diagnosis of a personality disorder. They said actually over there, it's actually very, it's very controversial. That's here in the US as well, or is that more unique to the UK?
Yeah, great question. So there's definitely a stigma to it here too. I'm not sure how much that stigma is over there, but I know anytime I've worked with a client and they've said that they were diagnosed with a personality disorder, I mean, it's almost like a death sentence is how it's received. And most of the time when I can start having this conversation with them around this attachment stuff, baggage that's come with them, that's created them to kind of become who they are and to react as they do, it really begins to take away the I'm bad or something's wrong with me. Rather than it being something I own as I am flawed, they can then start taking it in as something that happened to me that I now need to learn how to deal with. It's so much easier to work through it when it's not me who's broken and flawed. But if I can kind of, like the soldier that's returning from war, if I can put my finger on it outside of me and say, this is what happened to me, big or small, but had the big effect that it did on me. I don't know if that totally answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense to me at least.
Yeah.
It's just interesting how the title can be the stigmatizing part, even though everything you're talking about the same stuff. It's just the title of a personality disorder can be the challenge. But no,
yes. And personally, yeah, when I'm working with people that do have these personality disorders, most of the time I'm not even speaking super explicitly with the title of the personality disorder. No, what I'm trying to help them understand is the patterns and the processes of what takes place inside of them. If you were to go to the DSM and you would say, yes, this fits under narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder or paranoid or dependent or whatever, it would all fit, but it's not like the title really helps them anyways, other than we still have to go through and make sense of these processes that take place inside, and we have to work with those anyways. If they ask me, I'm not going to hold it back and I'm not going to lie to them. I will be honest with them. But I'm not making, you need to understand that this is what you're struggling with and this is your diagnosis, a huge priority. We're just working on healing these attachment traumas that they've carried for so long inside and helping them make sense of the strategies they've learned to manage those attachment traumas. Great question. Great question. I'm not going to go very far into these. There's the cluster A personality disorders, cluster B personality disorders, cluster C. You've got the suspicious type, which are the paranoid, the schizoid, the schizotypal. A piece I want to emphasize in this, though, is the common features of this cluster A is a social awkwardness, a social withdrawal. Typically, they're not type that tend to pursue in relationships or around relational distress. They're going to be more withdrawn in their responses. But there's going to be a lot that's occurring inside personally for them. With the cluster Bs, they tend to be more emotional and impulsive, typically characterized by dramatic, overly emotional, or unpredictable thinking or behavior. You can see both pursuing and withdrawing behaviors in these. Typically, you'll see both. With the cluster C, these are the anxious, fearful thinking, avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Again, with these, you can see both the pursuing and the withdrawing behaviors in them, but it's how much is occurring inside of them that's driving the patterns that kind of makes that what it is. With these, I want to emphasize that all personality disorders are on a spectrum. You know, people can meet certain criteria for some of the personality disorders, yet be workable. And then you have some that are so entrenched in that personality disorder that it seems almost impossible to help them gain any personal insight. And those are the tougher clients. I want to honor that piece. There are some clients where these learned strategies that they have inside are just so deeply embedded that they can be so very difficult to work with. Typically, these are the clients that we find ordered to be in our office. They don't come often willingly. Whether it's a spouse that orders them because they're going to leave if they don't, if it's a court process, or otherwise. But the lower you go down on the spectrum, those personality disordered symptoms can still be there, but they're just more workable. You know, there's more personal insight they can have and show, which helps the process along. Okay, treatments geared towards attachment traumas. You've got kind of the older ego state, Gestalt therapy. Internal family systems theory is a very popular one that's been, I think, gaining more and more ground and popularity when it comes to parts work and working with these attachment dilemmas that people have that I'm going to be talking about in just a second. My personal favorite is emotionally focused therapy. It's what I use with couples. It's what I'm working towards certification in. It is definitely one of the more humbling models, one of the most humbling models I've been, because in order for us to show up in others' attachment hurts and pains, we have to understand what it's like to go through that ourselves. And so it does require a lot of us, I think, personally. But it also gives us this gift to really help show up for people in their attachment traumas and to make sense of it with them. Powerful model. So steps towards healing. I hope this isn't too small on some of your screens. If you're on a phone, I'm sorry, you're probably going to have a hard time reading it. So I hope we can get those PowerPoints out too, perhaps. As with all things, the relationship of trust that we establish, that therapeutic relationship of trust, is a must. We have to have that therapeutic relationship of trust. If it's not there, we're not going to have a whole lot of effect. At the same time, it takes time to build that with someone with a personality disorder. Typically, they're not going to be very trusting of us, or sometimes they're going to be overly trusting of us right at first. But whenever I get that, kind of like with some of my borderline personality disordered clients, in the back of my mind, I'm just waiting for the shoe to drop. And not in an anxious, fearful way. It's only a matter of time until their idealized view of me shifts. And they begin to go to that black and white thinking of now viewing me as this enemy. And then we need to work through that piece. But if we're working on that relationship of trust, it will help us get through that. They must feel safe with you. And again, I want to honor, guys, sometimes that's easier said than done. There are some clients that are hard for us to work with. And what my experience has been and what I've seen in other therapists is there are some personality disorders that just trigger us. And most of the time it's because we've had experiences, painful experiences, even damaging experiences with someone that had that personality disorder. And so if that's the case, that's okay. That's okay. You've got some injuries to work with and deal with yourself, but go and get some help around that, because it's going to increase your effectiveness in working with the clients that carry these specific personality disorders. I remember for a time, so my mother loved finding friends that had dependent personality disorder. Now looking back, I can see that. But it was one of the ways that it made her less available for us as children. And so because of that, I carried some pain from it. And when I started seeing clients in my office where they carried dependent personality disorder traits, oh, it triggered me. I did not like them. I did not want to talk to them. I judged them very, very big. And, that's a piece I've had to kind of come to some realization and grips on for myself to help understand what makes them the way that they are and how to help them begin working through those attachment traumas. We need to be personable. We need to be relatable. If we have time, there's going to be a video I'm going to show you of someone with a personality disorder, and you're going to see the therapist not being personable and how that triggers the personality disordered client. Now, while we need to be personable, we also need to make sure we're maintaining appropriate boundaries with them. Typically it's in the big ways that they're seeking for us to kind of show up for them as in a sense, these attachment figures for them now that's helping them make sense of their world. And sometimes they might ask us to cross a boundary. And so we just need to be sure on where our boundaries stand, while at the same time reassuring them, when I assert this boundary, I'm not rejecting you. I'm still accepting you, and I want to help make sense of this. But if I hold that boundary and it triggers them, great. Let's go in and let's talk about that trigger. What's coming up for you right now? I had to do that with the client this week I met with her again. But she had referred a friend, And she's experienced so much rejection in her life. And the fear that came out of her after she had referred that friend is, oh no, Jonathan's going to like that friend more than he likes me. Which shows that she feels that connectedness here. We are getting some good work done. But the trigger came up and it was here and it was with me. So she ended up canceling the next appointment. But because I knew that this was a pattern in her, and this was just kind of my guess, is that she was probably taking it as a protective response by pulling away to deal with the pain of, she was already convinced Jonathan likes this friend more than me. And so I had my office manager call her, set up an appointment. Thankfully, she took it and she came in, and we were able to talk through that piece. And it was great because I got to use myself now in a way to help in that healing towards them. There is this piece of transference that clients, especially with personality disorders, will do with us. And that's where they can begin to experience healing. Really, they transfer a lot of their trauma onto those around them. And because their behaviors are so big when they come out, it's a lot for the others on the receiving end. And so how do they tend to respond on the receiving end? Either they leave or they react back in abusive ways. Either way, what happens is the very thing that client was afraid of happening ends up happening. What they can't see is their own behaviors that was bringing some of that to pass. And so when that begins to happen with us, and we're able to give them a different response, we're able to stay with them in that pain and that hurt, even as they direct it at us, then it starts this piece that begins to be able to trust. And more often than not, a client will begin to build this sense of trust with us as their counselors first, and then they'll start being able to create that into the relationships that are close connected to them. Cassie.
Oh yeah, good. You're watching.
Yep.
Jonathan, we had a question come in about any recommendations you have with working in a group setting where there might be multiple people with these disorders. The person shared that it can be pretty exhausting. So any suggestions with the group setting?
Yeah, so I want to whoever put that in there, God bless you, because it is really hard to work with that in a group setting, because each other have all their own triggers and they're responding in the various ways that they do, but as they all trigger each other, or as maybe several are triggering each other or being triggered by you, it's a lot to manage in a group setting. It's almost too much to manage in a group setting. One of the counselors that I supervised was talking about a group that they were doing, and there was someone that entered into that group with a personality disorder, and they took up the whole session. It was really hard to contain that session and do what they were there focused on doing, which was a trauma group, because that client was demanding so much. And when I say demanding, I don't mean that in like a negative way. They were just taking up so much of that time and energy. And so it's in cases like that where typically group may not be the best option for them. I do know that there are some DBT groups that I think can do a good job with it. I'm not as familiar with DBT. I'm not a DBT therapist, but I've heard of DBT groups doing a pretty good job with managing some of that. And really, in that case, it becomes more focused on skill. And so if those features are there in a group setting, it depends on the focus of the group. But if it's appropriate for the focus of the group, make some of this about that group. Talk about the attachment traumas, normalize the attachment traumas, start talking about the behavior patterns that come up as a result of these attachment traumas and these triggers that come up for us. And you can start talking about it in kind of that surface level way that can help us to then, when a moment comes up in a session, we can say, whoa, something just happened right now. What's going on with that, or what happened? Sometimes that might be a little too close for them. So maybe you touch base with them outside of that group if you're able to. But I do want to honor, sometimes it's really hard to manage that in a group setting alone. They need both the individual. Well, they need the individual in addition to the group if they're going to be seen in a group. Great question. I want to emphasize this piece of when we're helping people work towards healing, we want to track process, not content. When we're working with someone with a personality disorder, or to be honest, when you're working with anyone who's in any degree of distress what we're going to be focusing on is the content of what happened. So-and-so said this, and it made me feel like this, and now I'm acting like this. And we get caught up in kind of the story, which is the content of what's taking place, that it makes it difficult for us to track the process of what's happening. When we're working with a personality disorder, what time are we at? I should have some time before the end to kind of track an example of what that would look like with you guys. But when we're working with someone with a personality disorder, there's a complex process taking place inside of them that is centered around these triggers that they have. And so most of the time, what I'm trying to do is I'm identifying the trigger. What was the trigger came up? Was it something I said? Was it something somebody else said? And connected to that trigger, there is a response. The response was, the emotional response was, I felt this flood of anger. I felt this overwhelming fear, whatever that was, right? And so now we're tracking the process that's taking place from stimulus to emotional response to then what the behavior pattern comes after that. So when you go from this trigger that came to you, and almost before you could think, there's like this body response that comes up where you had this big fear. Then comes this way that we kind of process or make sense of that, which is I'm in danger, they're going to hurt me, I'm a failure, whatever it is, we want to help make sense with them what that perception is that they're perceiving that trigger in. And as we make sense of that perception and both the reactive emotion, and then if we can access a vulnerable emotion connected to it, great. If not, don't worry about it right away. Just stay with that reactive emotion. Now I want to make sense of the behavior pattern in light of all that just took place inside of them. It makes so much sense why you would want to just leave and not come in here again. I guess going back to that client that I was talking about earlier, the piece I had to explain with her was to make sense of why she wanted to pull away and get away. So she pulled away, she got away. She had this piece that came up that said, okay, even though I wanted to be a good friend for this friend by recommending him to go see Jonathan, now I'm scared. So we identified the fear that came up of Jonathan's going to like him more than me. There's the perception. And then it offered this chance of like, wow, if that's all that's going through inside of you, no wonder why you would pull away. That's always been the solution that you've had to deal with that hurt. And really for this girl, from the time she was a little girl, where her father was imprisoned and then, her family kind of fell apart and she was on the younger end. So she got really just kind of lost in the mix. She learned that I can't rely on others. And so when things get really hard, I'm just going to pull away and go be by myself. And so she did. She pulled away. She went and was by herself. I was able to reflect that with her. But then I was able to show her how she had just done something different. That she had just shared with me that fear. Rather than staying away, she could come to me with that fear. And in coming to me with that fear, I was able to offer reassurances that even though this other friend may be a cool guy, that does not change it all the way I feel about you and how cool I think you are. And then she was able to begin taking that in and have this corrective emotional experience. And that's really where the healing begins to happen. Corrective emotional experiences is where they begin to experience the healing. It's where they can be in that place of experiencing the distress and be met with a different response, but one that's more responsive, that's more engaged, that's more attuned. And it helps them to make sense of their world. And then instead of them saying it's all out here, others are doing it to me, they can start looking inside saying, oh, there's this process that takes place inside of me. And so when I'm talking about this piece on this list of process within self and then process with others, we want to make sense of the process of what happens within themselves, like I was tracking with that client. And we want to make sense of the process that happens with others. So after I kind of processed with that client what was taking place inside of herself, I said, let's make sense of this now in terms of how you experience life in general. Because she often feels lonely. But so often what she'll do is she'll kind of sabotage her relationships. When things are going good, she'll break up with the guy. When things are going good, she'll pull away from people. And how do they respond to that? So now I'm tracking at least how much we can assume is what's happening inside the others, which is, well, maybe they get confused. Maybe they don't understand why you're pulling away. Maybe they're not sure what to do, and so they get uncomfortable, and so they stay away and they pull away. And it helps us to begin making sense of the cycle of how now not only am I making sense of this pattern that happens inside of me, but now I'm making sense of how others see me. So it can build in this empathy piece that now helps me to make sense of how others see me and how they're reacting to when I'm going through that. And when I can make sense of how they're reacting to me and how their reactions trigger me even further, now I feel less helpless because I see what's happening. I see what's going on both for them and within me, and I can start making sense of that. It doesn't take the triggers away right away, but it heightens our awareness around it. They can at least help us to slow down our reactivity around those triggers. I feel like I'm giving a lot of content right now, and I'm sorry if it's almost too much. But thankfully you guys are recording this, so thank you for that. We want to work with people's injured attachment parts and their protective parts. So typically with these personality disorders, the behaviors that we see in them are the protective parts. When I'm working with someone who's dependent personality disorder, what's the behavior? They're constantly relying on people to take care of and do for them, right? And what's that doing? It makes me feel loved. It makes me feel cared for. It reassures this piece inside of me that says people really care. People really care, right? And so that's the part we're trying to make sense of, is what's that behavior? Well, it's this protective part that gets people to either come to me or that helps to just comfort this pain inside. So it's either going to be trying to reassure this outside view of others and helping them to come towards me, or it's going to reassure this internal view of self that I'm good enough. Whether it's, kind of like with some of our narcissistic personality disorders, they can get very intolerant of others having a view of their own or disagreeing with them. But either way, they're trying to build themselves up in their own ego. Why? Because there's been a lot of damage that's been done to their ego that said, you're not good enough. And now I had to go through and learn this strategy to help myself learn how to feel good enough. But when it's us doing it for ourselves, it's almost this insatiable thirst inside that we can't completely quench. So we make sense of the protective parts, and we use those protective parts to say, what are they protecting? These injured attachment parts. And that's where we make sense of kind of this attachment trauma that they've experienced, or those attachment injuries that they've carried with them, that they have these triggers that are connected to, so that they can start making sense of the reaction to what their behavior then looks like. We want to normalize their attachment dilemmas. So, man, there's a guy I've worked with who I would say he probably meets criteria for paranoid personality disorder. Regularly, this guy is questioning what I'm doing, what I'm saying. If I reflect something back to him that I think I'm hearing him say, he'll say, don't put words in my mouth. He's just very paranoid about others, not being there for him. But here's this dilemma. This man yearns for connection with people. That pattern comes up in his marriage, and it's hard for him. He doesn't know how to manage that. He does get paranoid about his wife's intentions if she's going to leave him, and then he starts reacting. And he reacts in ways that criticizes her, that puts her down. Even here in my office, he'll react in ways that criticizes me. It's almost like this guy is always trying to be 10 steps ahead of me, and I have to work really hard to just keep up with him and the steps that he is ahead of me. But as I do that, and really as I just, in a sense, take my armor off, and I say, dude, I'm not here to hurt you, and I'm not going to do anything bad to you. If I trigger you, tell me. I want to hear it from you. And then whenever those triggers come, we start working with it, and we make sense of it together. And he's really been getting to this place where he can start making sense of that. He gets really reactive to this piece that's very worried about feeling not good enough or feeling rejected by others. Those two for him go hand in hand. But as he's making sense of that, he's gone from a place of, rather than seeing it from others, I see it now as within myself. But the attachment dilemma for him is, as much as I want to feel close to others, I feel like I can't trust them. And so I'm going to use that word again, I sabotage my attempts to get close to people because I'm afraid of them doing it first. And so then we begin to make sense of that attachment dilemma. And as we kind of unfold that attachment dilemma that they're going through, really what it does is it heightens this attachment longing that they have. It increases their awareness around the blocks, the barriers, the protective parts that make it hard for those attachment needs to be met, those longings to be met. And then we get to experiment. We get to start trying things out. Let's do something different. Let's try something different today. I love using myself because if we can experience a trigger towards me, then we can take that moment and create, in a sense, a corrective emotional experience where they can say, wow, here I did this behavior. Here I was able to share that vulnerability, and someone was able to stay with me in that and didn't reject me. And they didn't push away, or they didn't tell me that I wasn't good enough. And it gives them just a little more courage to start doing that with some of their loved ones. With that client, we eventually shifted to marriage counseling just to help that pattern there. And it's been helping them quite a bit. I already talked about this piece of co-regulating. So really our job is to co-regulate with these clients, give them that felt experience of where they're at and what's going on inside of them. And as we co-regulate with them, they're going to be more able to take and learn the skills to auto-regulate what's going on inside. But we have to get a felt sense of their attachment dilemma before we can proceed any further with them. We have to make sense of this stuck place inside. And really, that's the co-regulating that we're doing. No wonder why it's so hard. No wonder why it's so scary for you to get close to people, because it's never been a safe experience for you. We want to reframe their reactions from fully justified, in other words, I'm okay doing what I'm doing because so-and-so did this to me, to helping them reframe it to seeing, wow, I can't talk right now, I'm sorry. Their view of self or view of other that's been triggered, and then help them to be able to internalize that experience. If I'm working with a client that's really resistant to see it in themselves, if they just are so protected that they can't see it in themselves, I will work with them around any attachment relationships. If it's their parents or their caregivers, we'll start with there. If they can't connect anything there, we'll talk about siblings. We'll talk about students at school when they were growing up. We'll talk about a spouse. But we want to get an unhealthy attachment that they've experienced, that they've been harmed by, to help them make sense of that person's attachment experience. And as they start to see that person's attachment experience, they can then start being able to see the patterns inside of themselves. So often if I get a client with borderline personality disorder that comes into my office and they're struggling to see this pattern inside of themselves, more often than not, and really I would say about 95% of the time, they've typically had a parent that's also had borderline personality disorder, or narcissistic, or just wasn't available protecting with the other parent that had the borderline traits. And so as we make sense of the borderline traits in their parent, they start saying, oh, I do some of that. And it becomes kind of this avenue for them to then start looking inward and seeing within themselves what's taking place that they probably couldn't see before because they were so protected. But they can see that easier if we, from a compassionate light, can help them make sense of their parents and what was going on for them. Last, in terms of the steps toward healing, we need to recognize our own attachment baggage. We've got our own strategies to dealing with attachment disconnection, shaming, pain. And, the more we can kind of tune into our own attachment distress, the more we can make sense of our experiences when we've experienced the bad in attachment, in attached relationships, the better we're going to be able to help others through theirs. So I want to practice really quick. I know we're about 7 minutes out and I'm torn right now. There's a video I want to show where we can just reflect a little bit on what this looks like, what's going on in this person, and next steps to help him. Or I could take questions, and I'm torn 50-50. I'm not sure which direction to go. You guys help me. What would be more helpful?
We've gotten a few requests for the video. Okay, yep, video.
Done. Okay. We will show the video.
And we can always, if we run a little bit over 1:30, if someone wants to stay on for a question, we'll
Sure.
make sure that we either get their question answered or connect them with you directly. But yeah, lots of requests for the video.
Totally. Okay, that sounds great. Thank you for letting me know that. Just so you know, this is a really old video. It came off of YouTube as well. I want you to notice both the client and what's going on in them. I want to see, can you, well, never mind. You already see it right there. So paranoid personality disorder. But recognize what's going on in him. See if you can identify what are the attachment longings that he probably has, which we all have. What are the defensive strategies that make up this paranoid personality disorder? And how is the person doing the assessing or the counselor doing in terms of joining with him and making sense of that? Okay.
Most of us know a paranoid personality when we meet with them. The key elements, of course, are their suspiciousness of friends and relatives, their tendency to be almost like the avoidant, hyper-alert to the possibilities of threat. But rather than feeling inadequate and aversive, they tend to be provocative in their interpersonal behavior. They tend to be irascible in their mood. They are defensive, but in an angry and hostile way much of the time. So their suspiciousness does not lead them to aversiveness, but rather contentiousness and often belligerence. Some have what might be called mini delusions, small, minor delusions, but nothing grossly pathological.
So you said you're from New York.
New York.
And what is it that brought you here today?
It wasn't me, I'll tell you that.
Well, who was it?
I was ordered to come here by the courts.
Uh-huh. And their reason?
Not my reason, my wife's reason.
Uh-huh. And hers? Her reason?
Because I won't give her the money that she doesn't deserve.
Is this for alimony?
Of course, what else would it be for?
Uh-huh. And why doesn't she deserve it?
Because she's the one that's wrong, it's not me.
Okay, tell me about that. How is she wrong?
Well, she was fooling around.
Uh-huh. How long was she involved?
Since before I was married. I don't even know if my children are mine. Why should I give them any money?
Uh-huh. Okay, when were you first sure of this?
I've known for a long time. It's not a question of when.
Okay. How did you find out?
I just knew it. The way she acted all the time when she would come home or I would come home, like she was afraid of me already, like she had done something wrong.
Uh-huh, so it's mostly a feeling.
She tricked me into it. She just wanted to keep me hanging around so I could take care of the kids so she could just go on and fool around. What did you mean by that?
By what?
By that grunt. Like, you don't believe me. Why are you looking at me like that?
How am I looking at you?
Like you don't believe me. Listen, man, I tell you, she's the one that you should be examining. Why don't you ask me anything about her?
Am I right in thinking that you would rather not be here?
Would you want to be here? I guess you do. You have to be here. Wouldn't that be great if I just got up right now and walked away? Then they would think I was really crazy.
How do you feel right now?
Why are you asking me all these questions? What do you care?
Is there something over there?
I keep hearing things like there's something over there like this is being recorded or something. What's that thing over there on the wall? Why is there a curtain on the wall? There's nobody over there. Is that right here? You guys are all the same. You just like to watch every little twitch, every little look. You think you can tell exactly what a person is thinking or what they're doing.
Okay. So I know we don't have a whole lot of time to go over that, but any feedback in the comment sections around the questions that I asked as you guys were watching this?
We haven't had anything specific come in yet, but sometimes
That's fine.
a few minutes after.
That's okay. So what I'm going to do really quick is I want to just show you this piece. This is an emotionally focused therapy tool right here that was developed by Dr. Scott Woolley. We use this when making sense of couples and the attachment distress that they're experiencing with one another. But I also love using this when I'm working with a client that has a personality disorder, making sense of these different parts that they have. One is typically going to be this attachment longing part. I would put that here on the left. And on the right is going to be this protective part. And what we want to do is to make sense of these various parts of them and what's going on. So for this guy, I'll just speak real quick to it. He's obviously paranoid. He's worried about what's going on. Now, this man, I'm convinced he wouldn't have gotten married had he not desired a connection, had he not wanted that peace. But his life experience more than likely has told him, you can't trust people. And even when they appear to be there for you, they're not. And if they're with you, it's only time until they abandon you. And so on one side is this attachment longing that says, I want to be close to people. On the other side is this need to feel safe. And what's going to happen is I need to feel safe is I'm going to be constantly scanning primary emotion wise. I'm going to be constantly scanning for where is the danger? Where is the danger going to happen? And I'm going to look for every little possible thing. And you could see it even in that session. That guy was scanning the room. He was hearing a clicking noise. He was questioning the way the therapist was talking to him, looking at him. He was in such a defensive mode. And so from there, where we go, make sense of it. Yeah. Hey, man, you don't have to trust me. You've probably gone through so much in your life. It's hard for you to trust anybody, huh? And then get them talking about this piece that can't trust anybody, that protective part that has learned not to trust a single soul, and normalize that and validate that and make sense of it. And yes, of course, that's going to be the strategy that you've learned. Of course, that's going to be this thing that you have to do, because that's how you've kept yourself safe. That as much as you've longed to be close with people, you haven't been able to trust people. And then we start making sense of both sides, this part that longs for that closeness and connection, if they can go there with us at first. If not, we just continue making sense of this reactive cycle, the learned strategy that's pretty stuck. Okay, so I will leave it at that.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for that presentation. He will be putting his information here into the chat, and if you are in need of that as well, please let us know. We will be ending.